Hey, everybody, my name is Matt Bergman, and part of my job is helping other educators design accessible methods, materials, and assessments for their students. And I often use the Universal Design for Learning framework to look for different ways to represent things, to provide options for expressing knowledge and engaging. When I saw this assignment for the very first time, I looked at it and it had a lot of potential. But the way that it was designed could create some barriers for students. So, what we had right here was the name of the invention, what does it do, and why should people buy it? Now, there's not a lot of context with this. And so, that's what we want to dive into right now and share a little bit more about. So, with this particular project, it was about the 1893 World's Fair and how the 1893 World's Fair inspired Milton Hershey to create some innovations and solve some problems in the confectionery industry. 1893 was a key year because that was when the World's Fair was in Chicago. Now, there's some barriers behind this. And so, one of the methods that I often use for planning a lesson to make sure it's more accessible is I start looking at, okay, what is my goal? And in order to accomplish that goal, how am I going to assess it? How am I going to measure that students are successful? And what methods and materials could I use in order to help students get more understanding and achieve that goal? But see, often, a lot of times, there's a barrier that exists in the middle, and that barrier is when what is called learner variability is not recognized. So, what could we do here to help that? So, it often begins with looking at my goal and predicting what high probability barriers are going to exist in this lesson. Now, I've designed just a template right here that I often use when I'm working with other educators on, okay, what exactly are we trying to do here? So my lesson goal for this one is really to understand and apply how inventions are often inspired by need to solve problems and to inspire innovation. It's part of the unit goal that we were talking about with how it inspired Milton Hershey to make some innovations. So, what we started doing is we started predicting some high probability barriers that might exist. Now, barriers come in all shapes and forms. This is just helpful for me. If you just want to list some basic, basic things that you would find barrier wise with that. One of the things is that there's no background knowledge. Kids don't understand what exactly what we're doing here. What is the 1893 World's Fair? What inventions were there? So there's a lot of confusion on that. So they need some background examples. And what is an invention? The materials, when you think about it, this material is a one size fits all solution for students. So it's just a Google Doc, which you could print it out and hand it to students, or they could use this, but there's really not a lot of interaction, hyperlinks, examples, scaffold supports to help the learner. The other thing is that are there any options? Like, what options are there? Because when we give students too many options, they start getting paralyzed by the too many choices. It's like taking a 5-year-old down the cereal aisle and expecting them to make a choice just like that. It's just not going to happen. So, how could we put some structured choice in place? I also thought about we need some type of rubric to show students what exactly we're looking for here. And even in the instructions, what exactly are we looking for? Because this is so vague. All right. So we need to come up with that. So what we started doing is we started looking for different ways to overcome that. So when we're starting to look for ways to overcome some of the barriers that we see, we start looking at the methods and the materials and even the learning environment that we're in to see if there's something we can do to represent content differently, help students express their knowledge differently, and engage them differently. That's part of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. Now, the guidelines, just to let you know, are a set of 3 principles and 3 supporting guidelines. So there's 9 guidelines each. It's not a checklist. So you don't necessarily have to go through and make sure that every single guideline is on there. It's just to help you design a more accessible option here. So when I started looking for that, I did come up with some different ways to support student learning through multiple means of engagement, through action expression, and through representation. But you don't necessarily have to do this. You could focus on just one thing. So we thought about, what would be engaging is creating some type of learning menu for students to go through this process and to provide some scaffolds and supports to help with this resource. So what we did is we designed this. This is a learning menu right here about the 1893 World's Fair. So it's designed like a restaurant menu where the kids will choose appetizers, soup and salad, the entree, and then there's even a dessert part right there. The other thing is we wanted to represent things differently. So one of the barriers is that students don't know what an invention is, and they don't know what the 1893 World's Fair is. So we wanted to give some different options for understanding that. So that's why students have a video or an article to learn a little bit more about what this is. There's also an opportunity for them to reflect, which is really important because they're going to be answering some questions later on down the road based upon their invention. Other things too is like when we're talking about the World's Fair, 1893 World's Fair, there's a disconnect between what exactly is an invention and what inventions were at the 1893 World's Fair. So we want to make sure that we fuse them together. So I did some research and found some different inventions that you could check out at the 1893 World's Fair. This actually has a link to an article and a little bit more about the World's Fair, this idea at the World's Fair. Cracker Jack was one of the things. Wrigley's chewing gum was another. So these are very common inventions that we see today, and they were introduced and they solved a problem. Okay, so this right here is an opportunity for students to go through and practice answering the questions that they're going to have to answer later on down the road with their own invention. And that's where we went through and we had given some practice to just see if they're doing it right. Then we wanted to give students some choice, right? Because we knew that overcoming this obstacle, because it's too broad, we could provide some different choices for students. So the scenario is that they're going to create an invention and that they have a little technology, some technology, and a lot of technology right here, just based upon their interests. Because the goal is for them to create an invention. We're not dictating how they do it. And then last part is, we want to make sure that they can help analyze that. And so we want to provide them with a structure for analyzing their invention, because that's really important. That's going to tie into how Milton Hershey inspired the confectionery industry. So we have some questions right here that they're going to go through. And once again, they're going to have some different options to answer those questions based upon their interest. The other thing too is that we want to put scaffolds and supports in place so that they can then make the appropriate choice for demonstrating their understanding. So for example, right here we say, here's an option for you to use Google Docs, Flipgrid, and then Keynote. And if they've never used Keynote before, I have a little video clip that they can then use to go through and learn about that. I also would offer one-on-one tutoring and small group instruction on how to use this. But sometimes you forget things, so that video clip's right there. The other thing that we're missing is we need to somehow have a rubric to go through and share what exactly they need to know. And so that's actually why it's so important to know what type of skills and what type of concepts you're trying to come up with and trying to analyze so that it is construct relevant. So for example, are we grading their reading ability, or are we grading their ability to demonstrate their understanding and really come up with a project that demonstrates that, and then to be able to summarize it? So we want to make sure that we go through and we do that. And so what we can then do is we can create some type of rubric in order to help grade this part and the invention part, right? So a good tool that you could possibly use is called Orange Slice. It's a rubric generator. You could do that. There's also an idea called a single point rubric. I want to share with you what that single point rubric is. It's actually a pretty neat concept. Jennifer Gonzalez from Cult of Pedagogy actually originally came up with this in 2015, but I love this. These are the criteria, and then where do you need to improve? Where are you exceeding the standards? And these are the standards right here. So that's actually a really neat way of giving feedback. And you could even point value this where they get a point or they don't get a point. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. What may be helpful is using a single point rubric to give some feedback, having them make some changes, and then actually having a rubric with those same criteria with point values. So just an option for you there to make it a little bit more accessible. Then what I would do is I would start planning this lesson, right? And so, how exactly would you plan this lesson? What might be helpful is have some hook at the very beginning of an invention that maybe kids have never seen before, and ask, what does it do? What problem do you think it's trying to solve? And then actually educate them on that through a video clip or through, maybe a combination of different things. Then introduce this project to them. And what I would do is, because this is going to take place over a series of days, maybe have them set a goal. So, what's your goal for today? And then analyzing that goal at the end of class, from the last 5 minutes of class, did you meet that goal? What changes do you need to make? The next day, when they come in, having them for their do now or their anticipatory set, what is your goal for today? And maybe talk to somebody else in the classroom about that. Start working on that project, and then having them analyze that goal at the very end. Meanwhile, you're providing direct instruction, small group instruction, and support to the students as they navigate through this project. So that's sort of what I see right here. And once again, that's where you begin the planning process. So just to kind of recap, predict what high probability barriers do you see here? Okay. What are some ways that you can overcome those high probability barriers, which we saw right here? And then begin the planning process where you can start planning your lesson so that you can meet the needs of students. So hopefully that helps. And thanks for watching.